Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCGO codes, including the stuff from Lost Origin, make sure you check out the Potown store. You can get a 5% discount on your orders using that code OmniPoke. For today's video, we're going to be revisiting Lostbox in the Silver Tempest format. It actually gains a really interesting Ariados tech, which I think could be taking the list into a new direction. And here is the card on the right-hand side of your screen. The String of Shade ability is what we're looking at here, increasing the attack cost of VSTAR Pokemon by 1 colorless. This adds a new disruptive element to Lostbox and can allow us to buy some turns or make it much more difficult for VSTAR attacking Pokemon to chain attacks into us, which is obviously excellent. I think it gives us a lot of help against the likes of Oranguru, which is previously one of your harder matchups, and can chip in against things like Palkia, where now with the increased attack cost of their Palkias themselves, maybe they're less able to use their Radiant Greninja against you, or if they do use Radiant Greninja, you can then punish them in the late game with this Ariados coming into play, and sometimes you end up buying free turns out of the opponent, which is very, very promising. At the same time, playing a 2-1-1 split of a previous Ariados is what we're going for here, because there is a Dark-type Ariados that has a Gusting ability. You can bring back evolved Pokemon from the opponent's bench into the active when you evolve into this Ariados, which means the 4 slots that are coming out are going to be cross-switchers, and we now become this 2-1-1 Ariados package, which offers the same thing, really, where you're able to Klara and Gust all in the same turn, similar to how you were able to do it with the cross-switchers in the Tord build at the very least, which is fantastic. And it also means we have some redundancy here, which means if you are Comfeying or Colressing and see that Serena supporter in your hand, in the selection, you can Lost Zone it knowing you still have that Ariados as the fallback plan to still offer some Gusts. So it's a very efficient way of us having potentially 2 Gusts in the deck list, and the Ariados comes in to help some of our weaker matchups. So let's see how I fit this in then. Like I said, it's a 2-1-1 Ariados split. The rest of the list is as we already know it, the 4 Comfey, the 3 Sabeleye, the 2 Cram, and the Zard. This isn't changing. The core of the deck is still the same. But the 2-1-1 package, like I said, from a Tord 60, we've essentially taken out the cross-switchers. I've also had a cut of Lost Vacuum to add in a Serena supporter, which gives us a 7th draw supporter just in general, which is no bad thing, but also is going to give us a alternate Gusting option to the Spider Net Ariados that we already have from many sets back now that has never seen the light of day, but because we have this split of Ariados, it makes that little bit more sense for me. You'll notice I'm also playing a Miltank in the list, and we're not playing Twin Energy or anything here, so it will be a slow roll of this Miltank, but it's going to be a tech card again for Oranguru, but also notably for the Vikavolt V matchup, which is a new one that we're definitely concerned about. Look how many items we're playing, but that deck typically doesn't have many answers to Miltank, so especially with double Klara, the 1 Miltank often gets the job done, because even if they do play answer Pokemon, you can get through them with your Cram and your Sabeleye and your Zard, and just recover the Sabeleye and make it very difficult recover the Miltank and make it very difficult for them to actually take 6 prizes. So we are teched for Vikavolt. I feel like it makes sense because it is a potential new contender that's at least going to be that tier 2, in my opinion, based on its matchup spread. So yeah, I feel like that's a worthwhile include right now. But that's up to you if you want to make the changes. Outside of that, the item cards are basically all the same. You'll notice we have a new ball split going on in here. We have 2 level and 2 fog crystal. That's because, of course, Ariados, the grass type at least, has 90 hit points. So establishing that, turn 2 is going to be really problematic for Arceus players, certainly. It means they had to have naturally hit double turbo turn 1, which isn't always the easiest without Starbirth to help them. Or they're going to be doing random Starbirths for Melanie plays and whatnot, which is also not the easiest thing for them to weave in, even when they are cherry picking 2 specific cards. And some Arc builds simply don't have that Melanie option, so they will be missing a ton of attacking, and that's just a free hit with a Cram or free sprinkle with Sabeleye. All good news for you. It's free damage, and it also stops them using cards like Hyper Potion that little bit more throughout the game as well, which was previously a big issue for healing builds of Arc, certainly. Because they were undoing your early sprinkle damage or your Cram math that would mean the Zard wasn't as effective. Now that you have the Ariados in here, you're kind of blocking their option to Hyper Potion because they're having to front load so many more resources onto each individual V-Star they attack with, which is such good news here. So The shell of the deck is essentially the same. I'm only playing one Manaphy, which is maybe cheeky, but we are playing the Hisuain Heavy Ball to be that sort of... It can get me Miltank, it can get me Manaphy, it can get me Zard in all these sort of situations. It's trying to be that, you know, pseudo-second copy, at least to find the card quickly. And I am playing one copy of Quick Ball that's coming to the list. I saw Todd did this in one of his more recent regional lists. I think it was his Lille 60 played one copy of Quick Ball. This is to defend yourself a little bit against Lost City. So that you're not having to proactively put down Radiant Zard, because then you can get punished by Lost City Gust plays. So we are playing that one copy of Quick Ball. Plus, now we have even more basics that we want to cherry pick, and it's an additional out to Manaphy as well in the openings, especially now that we've taken one out of the list. It feels a lot more valuable to do that. But yeah, the core of the deck is actually very, very similar. We've just taken a few slots, like we're playing one less Switch Cart, we're playing one less Lost Vacuum, and we're playing one less Psychic Energy. To add in like Miltank and the Ariados package, which sometimes the Ariados package would otherwise be cross switches anyway. So it's very, very similar in what we're trying to do with space. So it should, in theory, have a very similar consistency to the list that you've seen previously. But now with added disruption from Ariados and even added Gust from Ariados as well, which in theory is a lot easier to get done when you are getting hit with Roxanne and Marnie and whatnot than getting a combined double cross switcher. You have a little bit less redundancy, and it's obviously one of these additional cards that you'll see in your flower selectings. You see you're one of Ariados and you're really incentivized to take it, so you don't shut the door on yourself for that option. But I think it's one of these cards that doesn't have to come into every single game. But if you've been able to avoid lost zoning it, it's a great late game option that gives you the potential to Klara Zard back and Ariados bring something back up, you know, a 2-prizer or a 3-prizer, and get that one-hit KO after setting them up with Sabeleye and whatnot throughout the game. So seems like a natural include into the deck list. Let's talk about some other options here. I have seen a lot more Lostbox is getting aggressive with the Zard a lot earlier. Twin Energy could make some sense here because we're already playing Miltank as well now, but also the likes of Raihan, the likes of Mirage Gate, even in just like a 1 or 2 count, or possibly even Basin if you're not feeling the Path of the Peak is quite as valuable anymore. These could all be pretty reasonable. In the middle of the screen, you can see there are the 2 new tablet cards we could be playing in our decks, either giving ourselves a Search 1 effect or having that spread approach. Could be worked in with the Drapion or the Zapdos. Zapdos could be an alternative line to Miltank to try and help out against Vikavolt, but of course the energy count gets even more wacky at that stage, which is the only thing putting me off. But if you want to tech heavily for Mew, you can play the Drapion. And if you want the Zapdos in here to maybe use one of these VSTAR powers, it could be very interesting. Earthen tableting stuff down to 100 hit points, allowing you to then cram and sable your way through the remainder of the game, also does seem appealing. Zigzagoon, always a decent card for the Tina matchup and for mirror matches, could be pretty valuable. You always have to be... Well, you basically won't use your Ariados in mirror anyway, or against Tina, to be honest, so you don't have to worry about getting 60 hit point Spinaraks in play. It won't be an issue for you. You'll just use them as fodder, essentially, which is always good news. Choice Belt could also come in, again, just make your damage more powerful with your Crams in the early stages, threaten the 2-hit KO onto a V-Star. Could be even better now that your Ariados locking them out of an attack, maybe hitting a Palkia or hitting an Arceus that can't respond on you is a lot more appealing. And then there's always the option of just increasing our support account. Having a Pal Pad gives you some redundancy. It gives you that license to Lost Zone a Klara. Gives you that license to protect yourself in the sort of mid to late game by putting 2 Colresses back into the list once you eventually naturally find your Pal Pad, so that if you are getting hit with Hand Disruption, you'll just have more push potential in the late game stages. And Pokegear as well can be that early option into Colress, which is, of course, by far your most important supporter, at least in the opening stages, because that's going to be the way we ramp to 10 as quickly as possible, which is still the priority of the list. Let's have a look at the matchup spread then, and I'm actually pretty excited about Lostbox. I feel like I was saying earlier, Arceus, Goodra, and a few other Arc builds were sort of keeping Lostbox in check to an extent, and the Palkia matchup was pretty awkward because they could represent a good 1-prize map with Inteleon and with Radiant Greninja, and also had the push potential with Palkia. I think they get pigeonholed into a corner now because they just need that extra energy on their Palkias the entire time. I think they can fizzle and miss attackers. Certainly lists that only play 1 Melanie will get massively punished by this. So that's something I'm excited by. So I think your matchups into Palkia and Arceus stabilize. You get a hilariously good Zoro matchup for free now as well, which is great. I think your Tina was already like pretty reasonable, if not favored. The Bliss Tank is one of your harder ones, but you do play the Horn and you're going to try and Lizard as much as possible. I think if we played more Energy Acceleration for your Charizard, you would have a better time into this matchup, which is already a little bit sus. I'm teching for Vikavolt, so I'm telling myself it's going to be okay, but this may need more testing. It may not just be one Miltank that changes the complexion of the game completely if Vikavolt is going to tech certain cards themselves. The list I've seen from Japan weren't playing techs, and there's many reasons to not really respect Miltank right now, because I don't think it's like that good in many archetypes. I think Blissey might be falling off just based on the other top decks in the game. Like, for example, it's got a terrible time into Lugia. So I feel like Miltank could just be this bit part player that scuffs exactly Vikavolt, and most of the lists naturally have answers. So I don't necessarily think Vikavolt will tech for it, but it means right now that we have the answers and they don't, but that could be an evolving situation. And I think if they do start playing Miltank answers, we're going to have a really bad time into that matchup, because even if we can, if they can recover the Miltank against them, we still need to find our attackers and our energy naturally without having a ton of Comfey selects and retreats and shimmying around our board. We just have a really fat deck size because all of our items are being locked out. So those are the things that I'm a little bit concerned about. I think your Lugia matchup should be pretty reasonable. I know we can both represent one prize maps, and the Archeops do have high hit points, which is annoying for your Crams, and it means that Sabeleye has to sort of divide and conquer a lot more aggressively, but I do still think they're going to be having multiple 2-prize Pokemon in play most of the time. For most of my testing so far with Lugia, it's been very difficult for them to not put down the likes of Crobat and Luminion, which gives you easy maps and possibly even Horn plays as well, which I think is pretty appealing. You'll always have the option to at least Horn the one Lugia that they use to get into the game, so it should give us some easy mapping here. The Regis continues to be one of the harder matchups. That's not changing too much. They actually gain supporters, really, in Serena, so I think they gain a small percentage point buff against you, so that's a fear. And Kieran Palk is actually one of your harder matchups in the Lost Origin format, which does surprise me. But again, I think we pigeonhole them into what they can attack with when the Palkia is less usable for them if we are developing an Ariados. So I think that's only going in our favor, that little bit. So yeah, I think overall your matchup spread is really good. Like, Lostbox is still one of these decks that is... people always say it's like one of the hardest decks to play in the game right now. So not many people gravitate towards it, but it's on the same power level as the other top decks. It's like as good as Mew, Tina, and Palkia right now, quite easily, I think. It's just like harder to play and gets more punished by mistakes, and best of 3 is also punishing a deck like this, because you brick once in your best of 3 and you're not able to win the series. You probably just tie the series. So in terms of like just a purely winning games perspective, it's easily one of the top 3 decks in the game, I think, and its matchup spread does really reflect that now that we're improving it with this Ariados package. So my closing thoughts are, Lostbox is still great. Lostbox is going to be still one of the premier one-prize decks in the game. I do think it does get farmed a little bit by Regis. Like, being unfavored into Regis is still a pretty bad thing from a metagame placement, because Regis is probably going to continue to be the most popular one-prize deck, which does give me a bit of headache. But otherwise, I really like the positioning of Lostbox. I think you can be pretty aggressive, pretty sneaky, and just very efficient with what you're trying to do with the list, and improving some of your like 50-50s into Palkia, and improving what were some of your hardest matchups in the Arc variants is very appealing. So I'm really looking forward to playing some Lostbox. It doesn't change a whole lot, but your matchup spread changes just by adding in this Ariados package, and the fact that you're probably going to be pretty reasonable into the Lugia matchup as well is also very appealing. So I'd like to hear your thoughts down below. Were you envisioning an Ariados package going into Lostbox? Do you think this is pure copium and it's not going to change a single card? Or do you think that Serena's the real buff to Lostbox, just gaining 1, maybe even 2 new draw supporters so that you don't just completely brick and pass immediately, is also good news, and I'm happy to see that including into the list as well. Let me know your thoughts on Lostbox down below. Do you think it's going to continue to be a top contender? And I'll see you in another video tomorrow. Cheers.